In the fall of 2017, I took a solo backpacking trip into the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana. It was supposed to be my reset. I'd just gone through a brutal divorce. My father had passed 6 months earlier, and I couldn't take the noise of life anymore. Friends checking in, the pity stares at work, the constant buzz of phones and clocks and deadlines. I needed quiet. So I returned to the one place that had always felt like mine, the mountains. I planned a 5-day loop, remote, off-grid, no signal, no towns, just me, my pack, and the trail. The first day was uneventful. Just long stretches of pine forest, crisp air, and that comforting silence you only find in the highlands. I made camp near a small creek, ate jerky and powdered soup, and fell asleep to the sound of moving water. The last peaceful night I'd have for the rest of the trip. Day 2 started off. I woke to thick, colorless fog swallowing the trees around my tent. Now, fog isn't unusual in the mountains, but this was different. It didn't move. It didn't thin. It sat as like it had weight, like it had purpose. And everything was quiet. No birds, no wind. Even the creek sounded muffled, like the forest was holding its breath. I packed up and got back on the trail, expecting the fog to lift. It didn't. Visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet in any direction. Shapes of trees turned into silhouettes. My own footsteps sounded dull against the dirt. And then I started hearing it, twigs snapping. Not just once, repeatedly. I'd stop. It would stop. Walk again. Snap. Pause. Nothing. Around noon, the trail curved around a ridge, and that's when I saw him. Just ahead, maybe 30 or 40 feet in front of me, standing off to the side of the trail in the fog, was a figure. Tall, thin, male, from the shape, wearing a coat. His arms were at his sides, face shadowed by a hood or hat. I couldn't make out any detail, just the shape of someone standing perfectly still, facing me. I stopped, called out, "Hey, you all right?" No answer. I raised my hand, gave a small wave. No movement. He just stood there, watching. Then, without turning, without walking, he stepped sideways into a tree. Not behind it, into it, like smoke being pulled into wood. Gone. I rushed forward, heart thudding. No one there, just bark, pine needles, no footprints, no sign of anyone. I stood there in the fog, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Mountain light, fatigue, illusion. But deep down I knew better. I wasn't alone. The rest of that day was a blur of nervous hiking. No sounds, no animals, just fog, and the creeping sensation of being followed. At one point I stopped to take a drink and swear I heard breathing behind me. When I turned, nothing. But the smell. There was this cold rot in the air, like mildew and old meat. It followed me for miles. That night I made camp early. I didn't even bother setting up a fire, didn't want to draw attention. I sat in my tent with a flashlight on low, eating cold trail mix and listening. At first it was the usual night sounds. Then they stopped. And I heard crunching, footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling my tent. Once, twice, then silence. I held my breath. Then came the whispers, low, breathless, right outside the nylon, like someone muttering through cupped hands. I whispered back, "Hello?" And then something pressed against the tent wall. A face, pushing from the outside, skin pale, eyes hollow, no mouth, just smooth stretched skin. It hovered there for 2 full seconds, then slid downward as if it sank into the dirt. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I left everything behind, tent, gear, stove, and just hiked. The fog was still thick. Hours passed, no sun, no trail markers. But I kept moving, driven by something primal. Every so often I'd hear humming, like someone softly mirroring my breathing on one note trailing behind me. It wasn't until I was less than half a mile from the ranger station that the fog suddenly lifted, like it had a boundary. I stepped out of it like walking through a wall of mist. When I made it to the building, the ranger looked surprised. He said, "You came down from the North Ridge? No one's used that loop all week." I told him what I'd seen. He didn't laugh, didn't blink. He just said, "You didn't see the man in the fog. He saw you. And you left before he got curious." Back in the summer of 2018, I set out on a solo hike along the Timberline Trail, a 40-mile loop that winds around Mount Hood in Oregon. If you've never been, it's one of the most beautiful and hauntingly remote stretches of alpine wilderness you'll ever step foot in. I'd done pieces of it before with friends, but this was the first time I attempted the full loop alone. I had taken time off work, geared up for 5 days, and planned everything to the hour. I wasn't running from anything in particular. No trauma, no heartbreak. I just needed silence, a kind of cleansing. And that's what I got at first. The first day on the trail was perfect. I started from the Timberline Lodge trailhead and moved clockwise. The weather was warm, blue sky overhead, the scent of pine and damp earth rising from the forest floor. I passed a few other hikers in the first few hours, but by the time I reached Paradise Park, I was alone. I made camp near a small stream under a canopy of trees. The only sound as I fell asleep was the rustling wind and distant running water. I remember thinking, this is the kind of silence people crave. That night was the last peaceful sleep I'd get. The second day was longer, crossing steeper terrain. I made it past Zigzag Canyon and set up camp near Ramona Falls. Beautiful, remote, and silent. I made dinner, boiled water, and crawled into my tent just after sunset. But around 10:45 p.m. I heard something. A scream. Not an animal. Not wind. A human scream. Sharp, panicked, echoing through the trees like it bounced off invisible walls. I sat up instantly, heart racing, listening. 10 seconds passed. Then another scream. Closer. I unzipped the tent and shined my light outside, scanning the trail and the tree line. Nothing. No movement, no voices, just silence. I stayed awake most of the night, gripping my bear spray, ears straining, but nothing else happened. In the morning, I convinced myself it had been another camper, drunk, lost, or maybe just messing around. That's what I told myself anyway. I packed up and hit the trail, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Mid-morning, I passed another hiker. He looked off. Older man, maybe in his 40s, wearing a sweat-soaked shirt and a blank expression. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. I nodded and asked, "You okay?" He stopped, looked at me. "Did you hear it last night?" I paused. "The screaming?" He nodded slowly. "It followed me. Camped in 3 spots. It moved when I moved." Then he looked over his shoulder and said, "I don't think it's a person. I think it lives here." And then he walked away. Not another word. I tried to brush it off, but the unease crept in and stayed. That night, my third on the trail, I camped near Elk Cove, above the tree line, wide open, clear stars above, no wind, no sound. But at 1:17 a.m., I woke up to something worse than the scream. Breathing. Deep, calm human breathing. Coming from just outside my tent. Not circling, not stalking, just standing there. Breathing. I didn't move. Didn't call out. Just listened. It lasted maybe 2 full minutes. Then a whisper, right against the rear wall of the tent, near my head. "You heard me. Now I'll hear you." I launched out of the sleeping bag, flashlight in hand, unzipped the tent and swept the light across the open field. Nothing. No footsteps. No shadows. But the silence, it was too silent, like the land was holding its breath again. At sunrise, I packed up and left. No breakfast, no gear left behind, just walked, fast. But the trail didn't feel like it had the day before. The air was dense, the birds were gone. The trees, when I passed them again, looked different, more twisted. Dead branches littered the trail like something had passed through violently. And the worst part? Every time I stopped, I heard footsteps behind me. Soft, almost careful. Like someone was trying not to be heard, but still wanted me to know they were there. About 2 hours from the exit trailhead, I turned around suddenly and saw something I'll never forget. A figure, human-shaped but not right. Tall, too tall, long arms, no face, just a blank blur where the face should have been, standing between two trees. Watching, and then it stepped backward, not to the side, straight backward into the shadow, and vanished. I practically ran the rest of the trail until I reached a spur that led to a ranger cabin. The man inside asked if I was okay. I told him everything, expected him to laugh or dismiss me, but he didn't. He listened, and then he said this: "You're not the first. People hear the screaming all the time. We call it the echo. No one really knows what it is." I asked if anyone ever found the source. He shook his head. "It doesn't need a source. Some pain just gets trapped out here, and it doesn't like being ignored. I haven't been back. Not to Timberline, not to Mount Hood, because whatever that scream was, it wasn't asking for help. It was announcing itself. And once you hear it, it hears you too." In 2015, I joined a group of 4 other backcountry climbers for a week-long expedition into Wyoming's Wind River Range, one of the most remote and rugged areas in the continental U.S. All of us were seasoned, former military, wilderness certified, disciplined. We trained for this stuff. The trip was meant to be a challenge, an off-route summit none of us had done before. A high-altitude technical climb on day 3, 4 days in, summit, and 4 days back out. It was supposed to be hard. What it became was something else. The guy who didn't come back was Jake. Jake was 31, ex-Air Force, methodical, focused. He was the most level-headed of all of us. He didn't drink, didn't talk nonsense, and took safety seriously. If something happened to Jake, it meant something was seriously wrong. And something was, but not in the way anyone expected. We started the ascent on schedule. By the second day, we reached a small alpine basin just beneath a jagged stretch of granite cliffs, the kind of place that feels both majestic and completely cut off from the world. There were no sounds but wind and snowmelt trickling down the rocks. No cell signal, no light pollution, no signs of humanity. We pitched our tents and spent the evening checking ropes, gear, weather patterns. Everything looked good, except for Jake. As the rest of us were gathered near the fire, Jake had drifted about 30 feet away, just standing there, facing the cliffs. His head was tilted, not sharply but slightly, like he was trying to listen. I remember calling to him, "Hey, you good?" He turned slowly, looked right at me and said, "Do you hear the music?" I thought he was joking, but his face wasn't smiling. I asked, "What music?" He looked back at the cliffs and said, "It's coming from the rocks." We laughed it off. Maybe he was overtired, maybe altitude was messing with his head. But Jake didn't usually crack like that. And then he just walked away. No light, no jacket, into the dark. We shouted after him, grabbed our headlamps and followed. Found him standing between 2 giant boulders facing the cliff wall, his eyes wide and smiling. Not a big grin, but something empty, unnatural. When we got close, he blinked and said, "It stopped." That's all. We brought him back to camp. He barely spoke for the rest of the night. The next morning, he was gone. His boots were still in the vestibule of his tent, his pack untouched, jacket, gear, food, all there. It was like he'd gotten up barefoot and walked straight into the freezing mountain terrain. We searched for 13 hours that day. Nothing, not even a track. The next day, we radioed in a mayday to Park Services. They airlifted in search teams, brought dogs, used drones, even infrared. Nothing. The terrain made it difficult, but they usually found something. A torn shirt, a dropped glove, disturbed soil. But with Jake, there was nothing. It was as if the mountain had swallowed him whole. The official story was a fall, that he'd wandered and slipped into a deep crevice. But deep down, none of us believed that. Because on the night after the search ended, something happened. We were sitting in camp, quiet, exhausted. And then we heard it. A sound carried by the wind. Music. Not played music, not from a speaker, but from the cliffs themselves. A low, drawn-out tone, almost like a chant or hum, faint but rhythmic. One of us, Travis, turned pale and said, "That's what he heard." We didn't talk the rest of the night. Years went by, we tried to forget. Jake's family held a memorial. Then in 2020, one of the guys from the trip, Brian, went back to Wind River with his girlfriend. They hiked near the same basin, didn't go all the way in, but close enough. They took a photo on a ridge with the cliffs in the background. Nothing seemed off at the time. But later, when they looked at the picture, they saw something. On a small ledge, barely visible, the figure. Shirtless, pale, standing barefoot with his face turned toward the stone wall. It wasn't a smudge or a trick of light. You could see the shoulder, the profile of the head, even the way his hand rested against the rock. Brian sent the photo to us in the group chat. Nobody said anything for a full minute. Then Travis typed, "He's still there. If you made it this far, thank you for spending your night with us." If these stories gave you chills, there's plenty more waiting. Don't forget to subscribe to Night Fear Stories for new terrifying tales every single night. Sleep well, if you can.